The Dragonback Series by Timothy Zahn. Book 6, Dragon and Liberator. Chapter 10.
The next 4 days went by quickly, far too quickly for Dracos' taste. Heading into battle was nothing new for him. Heading into battle without knowing everything his commander was planning also wasn't new. But this was different. This was heading into a battle where he didn't even know the basic strategy Jack had in mind. And never had he fought a battle with so much at risk, so terribly much at risk. But worse than the concerns, and yes, the fears, were the doubts that began to creep into his thoughts. The question of whether, ultimately, the risk he and Jack were taking was even worthwhile. After all, the refugee fleet was hardly an easy target. There were 58 escort warships manned by experienced Gadda and Shantine warriors who would be alert for every possible danger. Surely they would defeat Neverland's force, no matter how many death weapons the Valaga had given them. But what if they didn't? Neverland and Frost would hardly be going forward with their plan if they didn't think they had a reasonable chance of success. What if they'd put together such a powerful force that even the refugees' escort was overwhelmed? What if they were, in fact, able to destroy the fleet? And if that was the case, what would he and Jack be able to do in the face of such a force? Could they get close enough to do anything, let alone do enough to make a difference? Probably not. Almost certainly they would be detected, identified, and killed long before they even got close enough to the attackers to use the new patrol ship's weapons. But there was an alternative, because Dracos knew how now that the Gadda on those refugee ships were not, in fact, the last of their kind. The Pukas of Rose Scroby were also of Gadda blood. Tanim's experience had shown they could also be Gadda in heart and mind. But they could never become true Gadda without someone to teach them their people's history and heritage. Dracos could be that teacher. And wouldn't that be a better use of his life, and Jack's, than walking uselessly to their deaths? It was a persuasive argument, a horribly persuasive argument. And over those 4 long days, Draco spent many hours struggling with it. But in the end, there was really no question as to what he had to do. Allison and Tanim were trapped aboard the Advocatus Diabli, with no one but Jack and Dracos standing between them and their own deaths. Whether Dracos gained or lost, whether he lived or died, Gadda warrior ethic demanded that he make every possible effort to save them. Besides, how could he presume to teach the Pukas what it meant to be a Gadda if he himself failed this final test? By the time the echo timer trilled its 10-minute warning, Dracos was again at peace. 15 minutes from now, he might very well be dead, and his host along with him. But he would die with honor, doing what he could to protect those who had put their trust in him. He would die a poet warrior of the Gadda. Dracos, Jack's voice drifted down the corridor from the cockpit. Come on, buddy. Time to get aboard. Coming! Dracos called back, giving the controls and his chosen weapons blister one final check. Jack wanted them together when the ship came off Echo, but at the first sign of trouble, Dracos would hurry back here where he could man the patrol ship's weapons. If he and Jack were going to die, Dracos intended to at least take as many of the enemy with them as possible. He reached the cockpit as the echo timer was counting out its last 20 seconds. Come on, Jack said, holding his hand back over his shoulder. Draco set a paw on Jack's palm and slid up the arm of the Malison ring flight suit the boy had taken from Chiggers. Do you have an attack plan? He thought as he settled into his usual position. No, but I have a non-attack plan, Jack thought back. Watch and learn, Simby. The countdown reached 0. Jack pushed the echo lever forward, and the shimmering blue hyperspace sky faded back to star-sprinkled black. There, stretched out in front of them, was Neverland's attack force. Dracos lifted his head from Jack's shoulders, studying the ships scattered across his field of vision. There was the Advocatus Diabli, of course, the luxurious Braxton Universe's corporate yacht that Neverland had run off with. There were the Malison Ring Gin 90 pursuit fighters, at least 20 of them, formed up in a defensive circle at the fleet's outer edge. A large troop carrier was off to one side, probably the ship Neverland had used to bring those 300 Brumgas here from Brumadum. Near it was a fueler ship, and Dracos could see the other 11 KK-29 patrol ships from Bentry clustered around it like hatchlings gathered alongside their mother at lunchtime. And there was one more ship present, floating a few hundred feet from the Avocatus Diabli, a large and agonizingly familiar ship. It was the Gatekeeper, one of the 4 ships of Dracos' advance team. Jack apparently spotted it at the same time Dracos did. "Oh, man," the boy's startled thought echoed through Dracos' mind. "Is that one of your advance team ships?" "It is indeed," Dracos thought back grimly. Suddenly, Neverland's strategy was as clear as the cold vacuum of space. Hey, slow down, buddy," Jack protested into Dracos' sudden flurry of thoughts and speculations. "Did you say something about a trap?" "Sorry," Dracos apologized, forcing his mind to slow down. Their telepathic link only worked if he and Jack were thinking directly at each other. Other thoughts could be sensed, but only as a wordless and rather distracting buzz. "Yes, it's a trap, but not for us. Do you see all the hull damage, especially in the forward part?" "Yes," Jack thought back, sounding puzzled. "I didn't realize Neverland's team had hit you that hard." "They didn't," Dracos replied. "That damage has been added since the Iota Clestis attack." He sensed Jack's sudden flash of understanding. "Got it," the boy thought back. "They're going to pretend they're being attacked by the rest of the ships and go running to the refugee fleet for protection." "Exactly," Dracos confirmed. "Many of the Valaga can speak our language well enough to be mistaken for Shanteen. They'll call for help, and the screening warships will almost certainly let them pass the defense ring." "There's no password?" "There are several," Dracos told him. "But the Valaga can feign transmission trouble or claim that all senior members of the advance team were killed or incapacitated." "And come to think of it, why shouldn't the warriors believe them?" Jack agreed grimly. "As far as they know, there isn't a Valaga for thousands of light years." There was a ping from the control board. "Hey, Chiggers," Driscoll's voice came over the speaker. "So you didn't get lost, huh? Too bad. Guess I lose the pool." Jack took a deep breath. "Showtime," he muttered, and flipped the transmission switch. "Yeah, and my heart bleeds for you," he replied sarcastically. Only somehow it was no longer Jack. Dracos twisted his head around to look up at the boy's face, a wave of disbelief running through him. Jack's face had subtly changed, his eyes gone dark and smoldering with resentment, a cynical twist to his mouth. And his voice was Chigger's voice, matching the mercenary's tone, phrasing, and attitude. It was as if Jack had flipped a switch and somehow become the mercenary. "That's not the only thing that'll be bleeding if you don't get your tail over here and fuel up," Driscoll warned. "Colonel wants us taking a turn at sentry duty." "Colonel's gonna have to wait," Jack growled. "I need to dock and get some repair sealant." "You still leaking air?" "No, now I'm leaking calcinine," Jack told him. "Calcinine?" Driscoll echoed, a sudden catch in his voice. "Yes, calcinine," Jack said impatiently. "You want me to spell it for you?" "You sure it's not just your breath?" "Smells more like your butt," Jack countered. There was another click from the speaker. "Chiggers, this is Borkin," Sarge's voice came on the line. "What's this about a calcinine leak?" "It's a calcinine leak," Jack said. "What do you want me to say about it?" "How about starting with how bad it is?" Sarge growled. "You need us to set you up an isolation bay?" "Ah, heck no," Jack scoffed. "It's not going to kill anyone, but it's eating the lining off my nose, and I used all my sealant on the air leak. Can you set me a port with the Advocatus Diabli?" "Oh, yeah, right," Sarge said with a snort. "Like the Colonel and Mr. Neverland want to smell it. Get yourself over to the Foxwolf. I'll have Ring King set you up a docking port there." "Copy," Jack said, and tapped his transmission key, cutting off the radio. took another deep breath, and as he did so, the resentful expression smoothed away. I think we're in, he said. His voice, too, was back to normal. It took Dracos another second to find his own voice. Impressive, he said. I had no idea you could do something like that. You like it? Jack asked, getting a grip on the control yoke and turning them a few degrees to the left. A little trick Uncle Virgil taught me. More than just a single trick, Draco said. It was as if you'd actually become the man. That's the best way to imitate someone, Jack said. Body, mind, attitude, voice, everything. He shrugged. If you can do it. Most people can't. At least not very well. Obviously, you're one of the few who can, Draco said. And all that after having heard only a few sentences from the man. Yet another useless talent of a reformed con man and thief. Jack shook his head sharply. Okay, I think my brain's ready to go with the telepathy thing again, the thought whispered across Dracos' mind. Next job is to actually make it aboard the ship. Dracos turned his head to look out the canopy through Jack's collar. While they'd been talking, Jack had shifted their course toward the gatekeeper. Isn't the next trick to figure out which ship is the Foxwolf? Dracos asked. Going to the wrong one would be a dead giveaway that you aren't Chiggers. Not a problem, Jack said. If you scratch the Advocatus Diaboli, the only ships big enough to dock this thing are your gatekeeper, the fueler, and the troop carrier. Troop carriers and fuelers, if you'll recall from all that reading we had to do when I was in the Wynyard's Edge, are usually numbered, not named. Neverland might have made an exception. He didn't, Jack assured him. Now that we know Frost's plan, Foxwolf is a perfect name for the gatekeeper. It'll start out looking like it's running for its life, like the fox in a fox hunt. Once it's past the main defenses, it'll suddenly turn into a wolf and start ravaging its way through the fleet. Dracos felt his tail twitch. With his mind occupied with Jack's performance, he hadn't yet spotted the most important implication of the gatekeeper's presence here. Which also means that's where the Valaga will have mounted their death weapons. Or at least most of them, Jack agreed. I'm guessing Neverland has at least one aboard the Advocatus Diaboli, just to make sure his own skin is safe. And if they could get aboard the gatekeeper and disable those weapons. Tell me about this calcinine you mentioned, Draco said. What exactly is it? And there isn't any actual leak, is there? Believe me, buddy, if there was, you'd know it, Jack said dryly. It's a heat exchange fluid for the laser chargers, and it stinks to high heaven. Odd, Draco said. Our heat exchange fluids are odorless. Actually, calcinine smells the way it does on purpose, Jack said. It's a safety feature so that you know right away if you've got a leak. Firing lasers without being able to dump the heat is generally considered a very bad idea. Agreed, Draco said. But won't those aboard the gatekeeper then know immediately that we have no leak? The minute they get close enough to get a good whiff, Jack confirmed. That's why we'll have to hit first and fast and then go to ground. I hope you know somewhere aboard where we can do that. There are several such hiding places, Dracos assured him, gazing out at the gatekeeper and forcing his brain to work. So far, Jack had been carrying the burden of planning here. It was about time Dracos picked up his share of the load. If we haven't got a leak, can we make one? Sure, but what's the point? Jack asked. The minute the mercenaries are in there see me, the game will be up. Unless those who meet us are Brumgas, Draco said. I doubt they'll be nearly so good at distinguishing one of Frost's mercenaries from another. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Jack frown down at him. Probably not, the boy agreed cautiously. But we don't even know if there are any Brumgas aboard, let alone that Frost will let them play reception committee. Actually, aside from the Valaga manning the death weapons, I expect nearly all aboard will be Brumgas, Dracos told him.
Very likely all those we watched being brought from the Chukuk estate, in fact.
Okay, buddy, you've now officially lost me, Jack said. I thought we'd just decided the Gatekeeper was their primary attack ship. Neverland's certainly not going to leave that part of the scheme in Brumgan hands.
They aren't here to handle the attack,
Draco said.
They're here to create the proper illusion. As I said earlier, the Valaga can imitate Shantine voices well enough to fool the fleet's warriors. What they can't imitate is the heat signature of 500 Kada and Shantine crew members aboard ship.
He caught Jack's flicker of understanding. So Frost has loaded the ship with warm Brumgan bodies?
Exactly,
Draco said.
The refugee fleet's sensors can't read individual heat emissions through the hull, but only the sum total. 300 Brumgas should be just about right.
And the spectrum for a living being probably looks different from ordinary heaters or anything else Neverland might have used, Jack said.
Exactly,
Draco said.
I'm sure Neverland would have preferred to use humans, but I'm guessing neither he nor Frost has access to the necessary numbers.
Hence the whole deal with the Patricia Cook, Jack said slowly. So if we can avoid the handful of Malison Ring mercenaries Frost has watching over the Valaga and Brumgas, we may be able to push our own game a little longer.
As long as we can,
Draco said.
The more quiet time we have to seek out and sabotage the death weapons, the better.
Ahead, the marker lights came on beside one of the gatekeeper's hatches.
There! That's our target hatch,
he told Jack, flicking out his tongue toward the lights. I see it, Jack said. Hop off, will you? I've got a job for you.
What job?
Draco asked as he leaped out of Jack's collar to land on the deck behind him. Go to the nearest weapons blister and get under the control board, Jack said. Right up against the inside wall, there should be one or more blue striped tubes labeled coolant.
Understood,
Draco said. Turning, he headed aft. And hold your nose, Jack's voice wafted down the corridor after him. I wasn't kidding about the smell. 5 minutes later, with the stench of calcinine curling his nostrils, Jack brought the patrol ship to a smooth docking alongside the gatekeeper. Dracos was waiting for him at the hatch.
You were right about the smell,
the Kada said as he laid a paw on Jack's hand and slithered up onto his skin.
What's our plan?
We stay with the Chiggers story as long as possible, Jack told him. He started to take a deep breath, instantly changed his mind. He straightened the collar of his flight suit, checked that his tangler was riding loose in Chigger's holster, and touched the hatch release. The hatch slid open. Beyond the docking collar was a medium-sized bay with the same light tan walls and deck Jack had seen in the wreckage of the Haven Seeker back on that fateful day when he and Dracos had first met. Squaring his shoulders, trying to act as if he owned the place, he stepped through the hatchway into enemy territory. But for the moment, anyway, the enemy seemed to be unaware they'd been invaded. The only other occupants of the bay were a pair of Brumgas working at an open access panel, and their only reaction was a curling of their own nostrils against the smell leaking out into their world. Like you own the place, Jack reminded himself.
Hey, you!
He called toward them.
Give me a sealant tube, will you?
One of the Brumgas half turned, his cheeks wrinkling in disgust.
Get it yourself,
he said, pointing a thick finger at a tool chest along the wall. Turning his back to the insolent human, he returned to his work. Smiling to himself, Jack headed for the toolbox.
Do we need to take the time to fix the leak?
Dracos asked. Unfortunately, yes, Jack said. The idea is that Chiggers came aboard, did his repairs, and then made himself scarce before anyone could find him and give him some other job to do. Vanishing without fixing the leak would look suspicious.
Understood,
Dracos replied. Kada's tongue flicked briefly through the air beneath Jack's chin.
But be careful! I can taste a hint of human scent beneath the smell of the Brumgas.
Plus a few Valaga? He sensed a darkening of Dracos's mood.
Yes!
No problem, Jack said, trying to hide his sudden twinge of fear. A people who had defeated Kadar warriors weren't a group he really wanted to run into, even if their death weapon was sort of cheating. We'll just have to be a little extra careful, that's all. The toolbox contained 2 different tubes of sealant. Jack wasn't sure which would work better for a calcinine pipe, but for the length of time the repair needed to hold, it probably didn't matter. Selecting the more expensive-looking tube, he headed back to the patrol ship. The hole Dracos had sliced in the pipe was small and easy to get to. Jack squeezed a generous portion of sealant across it and watched a minute to make sure it would solidify properly. Then, capping the tube, he went back into the docking bay and returned it to the toolbox. Which way? He asked Dracos as he straightened up.
Take the door to your left,
Dracos told him.
The death weapons will most likely be mounted in the bow, probably in the weapons bays, where they'll have an ample source of power.
Sounds reasonable. Just point the way. He was halfway across the bay when a figure stepped through the door ahead of him. It was a human figure, dressed in a Malison Ring uniform, peering down at a notepad in his hand. Only it wasn't just one of Frost's men. A man who would know Chiggers at a glance. It was far worse. And it was the last person Jack had expected to see here. It was Star Force Wing Sergeant Jonathan Langston, the man who'd helped him escape from Semaline. A man Jack had thought was dead.